Welcome to the Weaver Sews. I'm Daryl Lancaster. In previous videos, we covered welt pockets and patch pockets. Now it's time to talk about side seam pockets. These type of pockets are fairly easy to construct and work really well for longer garments like my 600 walking vest, my 300 and 400 swing coats, and this hybrid of my 200 jacket combined with my 600 walking vest to create a dramatic duster. And this pocket is used for my 1000 swing dress, which I'll use to demonstrate. First, let's look at the pattern for my swing dress. There are small markings on the side seam that indicate where the side pocket opening will be. The first thing is to figure out if the position of these pockets suits your body. Pin together the shoulder and side seam lines, leaving the area between the markings open, and try on the tracing. Slip your hand in the pocket opening and make sure you're happy with the position. You can always move the markings up or down. Once the garment is cut out and stay stitching is complete, you'll need to begin the construction of the pocket. For more information on stay stitching, watch the video called First Steps. That link is below. For silhouettes like my 300 or 400 swing coat and my 1000 swing dress, there is a steep angle to the side seam lines. I add stay stitching from the hem to the underarm to keep those angles from stretching during the construction process. For the stay stitching here, I stitched 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter from the cut edge instead of the usual 1/2 inch or 1.2 centimeters. You don't want the stitching to show in the pocket area. The fabric I'm working with for this dress is hand woven, of course, from a rayon boucle and a cotton tape in the warp with a wool crepe in the weft. The draft for this fabric is available as a free download from my eShop, and that link is below. Though the fabric was washed and dried, the rayon is very slippery, and to prevent unraveling as I worked through the construction process and to maintain the shape of the neckline, I fused a 3/8 inch or 1 centimeter strip of crosswise cut fusing knit around the perimeter while the garment section was still attached to the pattern. We covered this option in the video on what to do with the cut edges of hand-woven fabric. This pocket pattern is pretty standard. Most garments with pockets in the side seam will have something approximating this shape. It allows the hand to enter and then drop down, so things that are stored in the pocket don't fall out. You can make the pocket bag as big or as small as you want. Cut 4 lining sections from the pocket pattern piece. Use a thin fabric that's sturdy, maybe something fun. This seems counterintuitive, but the pocket pieces will attach before finishing off the side seam allowances. That way, any seam finish you use, a Hong Kong seam finish, nylon tricot, a serger, all of which I've covered in previous videos, that seam finish will encase the edge of the pocket as well. Start by pinning one pocket section with right sides together, centered between the markings to each side of the garment front and back. Place the pins with the heads towards the garment. Before applying the seam finish, check to make sure that the position of the pocket section on the front matches the position of the pocket section on the back. With the pocket section pinned in place, apply the seam finish of choice to each garment half, encasing the flat edge of the pocket sections. Note that the pin heads face into the pocket, so that way I can apply the seam finish without taking the pins out. Since this is a dress, I've gone ahead and used the nylon tricot seam finish, which we've covered in a previous video. Keep the seam finish on the narrow side, about 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeter, if possible, is ideal. Press each pocket section away from the garment. This next step ensures that the pocket area won't stretch out of shape in the opening in the side seam. Since the side seams are cut off grain and steeply off grain in the case of the swing coats and the swing dress, this is an area that can easily sag and stretch out of shape, especially if you actually use the pockets. So we return to our old friend 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter twill tape. I'm using cotton, so I pre-shrunk it in hot water and I dyed it a slightly off color so you can see it in the video. We used this as a stay when we did the video on stitching shoulder seams and also across the top of the patch pocket. Here, we will take a length the same size as the flat edge of the pocket section and lay it on the seam allowance, centered over the markings on the wrong side of the garment, with one long edge right along the seam line. Though you can machine stitch right through the center of the twill tape to attach it to the garment section, that stitching will be seen from the right side. I prefer to hand stitch all the way around the twill tape. I used a combination of a slip stitch along the seam line and a catch stitch on the other long edge. Repeat this step for each of the remaining 3 garment sections, so both fronts and both backs will be stabilized. To sew the garment sections together, with right sides together, carefully pin the front to the back, starting at the lower edge, or in the case of the 600 walking vest, at the marking at the top of the vent, and pin what you know, making everything else fit. We talked about this in a previous video, pinning the match points and upper and lower edges together, and in this case, the pocket pieces as well, making everything else fit in between. Pin the pocket bag sections together as well, keeping the pin heads towards the center of the pocket. And now we get to stitch everything together. Starting at the lower edge, or in the case of the 600 walking vest, at the match point at the top of the vent, backstitch and carefully stitch the front to the back with a 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, stopping with the needle in at the lower pocket mark. Lift the presser foot and pivot the side seam so that it is perpendicular to the presser foot, and now you'll be heading off towards the pocket bag. Slip a length of bias nylon tricot around the edge of the pocket sections, lower the presser foot, and stitch around the pocket bag, finishing off the edge of the pocket sections with the tricot. If this is too much to do at one time, stitch around the pocket bag first and then apply the tricot seam finish once you've finished stitching the seam. Alternately, you can serge the edges of the pocket bag after the seam is sewn. Once you've reached the end of the pocket bag, end the tricot by cutting it, and with the needle in, pivot at the top of the pocket opening mark. Continue stitching the seam towards the armhole, back stitching at the end to secure. Now it's time to press the seam open. The problem is the pocket can't press open. To allow the pocket bag to lay flat towards the front, it will be necessary to clip the back seam allowances perpendicular to the seam line just above and below the pocket markings, allowing the bag to fall towards the front and the remaining seam allowances to be pressed open. With a very ravelly fabric, you can hand overcast, like a whip stitch, any cut seam allowance you think might give you grief down the road. And that's it. You have discrete side seam pockets in the side seams of your swing coat, duster, and walking vest. I've often had students ask why they can't put a side seam pocket into one of the jackets. When you place your hand or stuff into the pocket, the weight causes it to droop down, which might hang below the jacket hem. You can always alter the shape of the pocket bag or have the pocket bag terminate in the hem of the jacket. One more thing. In the case of the 1000 swing dress, there is an option to keep the pocket bags attached to the fronts of the garment so they don't slip around the inside of the dress, creating possible bulk at the side. This is an optional design element, and here you see that I've top stitched the pocket bags down in this commercial fabric version of the dress. This is much more difficult to do if the garment center front seam is sewn and you can't get inside to get everything to lay flat, which is why I recommend waiting to sew the center front of the swing dress until the side seams with the pockets are sewn. Simply open out the front, carefully pin the bag onto the front, and top stitch down. Usually I will run a hand basting line so I know where to stitch from the front. With all these pocket options, there should never be a time when you moan that women's clothing doesn't have proper pockets. I'm Daryl Lancaster for The Weaver Sews.